Welcome to Conversatio, the podcast of Belmont Abbey College. My name is Dr. Thomas Varacalli. I am the interim dean of the Honors College at Belmont Abbey, and today I'm delighted to be joined with Jeremy Tate, the CEO of the Classic Learning Test. Jeremy, it's great to see you today.
Hey Thomas, great to be back at the Abbey, one of my favorite colleges. I am determined to get a Tate kiddo here at some point. I love what the Abbey is doing. Thrilled to be with you.
Thank you. Jeremy, please tell us about yourself. How did you come into the field of classical education?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into it by accident. I actually went to seminary to become a Reformed Presbyterian pastor. And in seminary, through Chesterton and Peter Kreeft and Scott Hahn and a handful of others, read my way into the Catholic Church. And in that process, kind of discovered this tradition as well. But the other thing that happened was that conversion to Catholicism kind of derailed my career path. I was planning on being a pastor, ended up getting into the world of SAT and ACT prep instead. And I guess because of conversion, CLT also came to exist.
Well, how did you start the CLT?
So CLT was also kind of by accident. It's a funny story. SAT and ACT aligned with the Common Core standards back in 2015, and I really thought that I had a business idea. And I told my wife about this. So my business idea was that everybody was upset that the SAT and ACT aligned with the Common Core. Mm-hmm. And the Dominican nuns that I was working with at Mountain of Sales Academy, they were saying, we didn't sign up for this. Where's our test? So I thought, somebody's got to be creating another option, a test that's not Common Core aligned. So I was actually researching who was making the test because I wanted to make a prep course for the new test. I came to find out that nobody was making the new test, and the people who were making it, I could tell, didn't really know what they were doing. And so it seemed like there was an amazing opportunity. I was in the world of college counseling. I knew a lot of people in admissions and was able to say, hey, if there was a test, that reflected a TAC or a Hillsdale or a Belmont Abbey education, would that be of interest to have that as an alternative to the SAT and ACT for admissions? And the response was overwhelming. Yes, we would love it if there was something like that, but that's never existed. And so we had kind of a proof of concept and went from there.
So how does the CLT differ from the ASAT or the ACT?
Yeah, so the SAT has been around. It's funny, standardized testing in some ways is the most boring and the most interesting subject I think we could ever talk about. The SAT has been around since 1926. And for generations, the SAT was an aptitude test, meaning they would say, you can't really study for this, right? They actually took the same mechanism they used for the Army Alpha in World War I to basically figure out who was going to be in front lines and who was going to be back in intelligence, right? Well, the SAT was the only game in town, and after World War II and the GI Bill, and there's a huge surge of people wanting to go to college, colleges become very selective. And the mechanism to sort them becomes the SAT. So in the late 1940s, the SAT becomes a household name, and it doesn't have any competitors until 1959, when the ACT launches. So think about 59, you're a historian, Sputnik, the space race, all of this. Concerns about math and science falling behind the Soviets, and the ACT value prop was this, that it's not fair to have an aptitude test. The kids should be tested on what they learn in the classroom. Which sounds great until you stop and say, well, which classroom are we talking about? Are we talking about a Montessori school, a Catholic school, a Christian school, a Jewish school, a public school? And it became very clear over time that it was a public school they were talking about. All right. And so we launched CLT in 2015 to compete with both. And what we did was this. We realized that to some degree, the test always impacts curriculum. We're not even saying that's a good thing. I think that's debatable, right? But I would present it this way, Thomas, almost as a hypothetical, right? If you imagine for a second, what would American education be like today if everyone always knew that on the SAT and ACT, that's where you're going to have to grapple with Dante and Aristotle, right? Boethius maybe, Catherine of Siena, Flannery O'Connor. If people knew that, it would change what happens in the classroom. And so that's our hope with CLT, to put the Catholic intellectual tradition front and center. And with that, you can even change K-12 education.
That's wonderful. So imagine a high school senior taking the CLT early in the first semester of his senior year. What would the CLT look like to the student?
Yeah. So typically, I mean, mechanically, it's pretty similar to an SAT or ACT. The CLT, there's 120 questions. It's 120 minutes. It's a shorter test. But look, kids are bored out of their minds on the SAT and ACT. I've heard a number of students say you would never, ever read what's on the SAT or ACT unless you're taking the SAT or ACT. And they also have what are called these sensitivity committees, which I think started off with good intentions, right? And the idea there was like, look, let's say a kid had something terrible happen, maybe an uncle committed suicide. You wouldn't want to have a reading passage that references suicide because that could be triggering, upsetting. And so this started in standardized testing in the late 90s, but it got really out of control until today. The SAT and ACT have sensitivity committees where basically every passage is offensive for some reason to somebody. Mm-hmm. So what we've ended up with is this totally absurd scenario where on the most important test, kids are confronted with the most meaningless material imaginable. Mm-hmm. They're reading about the processing of Greek yogurt, right? About traffic patterns, a vacuum cleaner manual, right? Why not put students in front of the very best of what has been thought and said and let them grapple with that instead? So that's what students are going to encounter on the CLT.
Wonderful. How do you choose some of the readings?
Yeah, so we have an author bank. We have a great board of academic advisors. Provost Wysocki is on that board of academic advisors. And so 2/3 of everything we put on the CLT comes from that author bank. And it's a lot of fun to bring these academics together and let them get in heated debates about who should be on that author bank and who should not.
Wonderful. Well, the CLT is so wedded to classical education, and we're experiencing this wonderful revival of classical education. In your view, what are some of the main drivers behind this renewal?
It's incredible what's happening. You know, when we started CLT in 2015, a lot of folks would say, what is a classical school? They never heard of that. And now everyone has some reference point. They go, oh, my niece is in a classical school. Or, oh, my sister-in-law is homeschooling. They're using a classical model. And they're doing Charlotte Mason, right? Mm-hmm. And so this movement has burst onto the national stage now. And I don't care who you are, right, left, center, whatever. Every parent wants this for their kids, right? Every parent wants their kid to go to school and come back with an enlarged sense of wonder, right? They want their kids to be nourished on great stories. They want them to be formed in the virtues, to come back more honest, not less honest. So I think that there's a universal appeal with classical education. Everybody knows there's been something really wrong in education. Something has been deeply amiss. And I think the classical education movement has been able to come in and kind of put its finger on it and say, this is what education always was, and this is what it can be again.
That's great. Who is taking the CLT? Is it mostly students who come from classical education? Is there a rise in students from public school who are taking the CLT?
So it's kind of a funny story. For the first 8 years, about 93% of the kids taking the CLT were either homeschooled, Catholic school, or classical Christian school students, and some classical charter school students. Only about 6 or 7% public school students. A couple years ago, as part of Governor DeSantis' bid for the White House, he got in a public feud with the College Board, threatened to kick the College Board out of the state of Florida. They didn't go quite that far, but what they did do was they brought CLT in as an alternative. And with that CLT in a year, we went from 93% outside of the public school system to 85% within the public school system.
Wow.
And so right now, we serve majority Florida students. Over 85% of all the students we work with now are Florida. And for them, it's high stakes. You get a 96 on the CLT. You can go to the Florida State or the University of Florida for free. But there's kind of this funny dynamic where students are coming from a Florida district public school. Mm-hmm. They want to go to Florida State. And they're stopping to take a test where they're likely to encounter, Aristotle or Chesterton along the way, which is a lot of fun for us.
That's great. I wish I could take this test, but I don't need to. So. What are some of the most significant changes in implementing classical education in the coming decades?
That's a great question. Yeah, there's a lot of pain points in the classical renewal movement. Mm-hmm. Belmont Abbey, the Honors College, the whole college is solving one of these, and that's that these schools are in real need often of great teachers who can come in and pass along this great tradition to the next generation. So finding great teachers, but the colleges are starting to step up in a big way. And again, I think Belmont Abbey and others are leading that charge, especially again with the Honors College. But I think what it's going to be is a matter of finding these pain points around teaching shortages. Another pain point we were just talking about here with the Circe Institute is, retaining, especially male teachers. How do you do that when typically a classical school is only paying 20% of public school pay? Yeah. So I think one of the things we need to get is a classical school growth fund in place, and I know some folks are working on that as well. But this has now emerged. I think it used to be public school or private school. I think the question in 10 years is not going to be public or private. It's going to be classical or kind of modern secular progressive, whatever they're going to choose to call it. These are the two options. And there's a number of ways you can receive this if it's in a Catholic school, a charter school, or a classical Christian school.
That's wonderful. How do you think the CLT can support the broader classical movement?
Yeah, we see ourselves as kind of a least common denominator where, you may be doing Charlotte Mason, you may be doing homeschool, or you may be doing a Catholic school or Christian school, but you're not doing the College Board secular progressive thing. And so I think with that, we want to be kind of a least common denominator for the movement. Unintentionally, we've been able to bring folks together from within the movement as well to kind of cast a vision for how we go. And we believe this particular battle of trying to offer something more compelling than the vision for education that the College Board is offering, which is very impoverished, very utilitarian, right? It's just about college and career, and I think one of the ironies in this movement is, a great classical school, they never say that their reason for existing is to make students college ready, right, or career ready. But the little known secret is that, of course, they make the very best college students. And they make the very best employees, right? Because their education was aimed at something so much beyond just a job.
How many universities and colleges are now accepting the CLT?
We're at about 350, and we're in legislation in 6 states this year, Georgia, Tennessee, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, and Iowa. And so we should be able to hopefully replicate what happened in Florida this spring.
Prior to the Abbey, I taught at 6 years at Texas State.
Okay.
And so I worked at a state school. What would be your pitch to a state school for them to accept the CLT?
Yeah, it's a great question. And great relationships now. It's wild to me to even now to go into the website at Florida State or University of Florida and see CLT right there. I never thought that we would see that happen. But here's the deal. A college entrance exam has always been inherently also its own kind of enrollment engine. Right. And when the SAT goes all into the STEM and all of this, that's a good thing for Virginia Tech, right? It may not be a great thing for Hillsdale, but if the gold standard for college entrance exams can become a test that reflects something like the Honors College at Belmont Abbey, right? There's going to be a natural kind of symbiosis connection point, with that as well. Every school, Texas State, you name it, they all want students coming out of the homeschool world, the classical charter school world, the Catholic school world. 20 years ago, colleges didn't know what to do with homeschool students. Right. Now they're fighting over homeschool students. These students are some of the most engaged in campus life, and they academically are at the top of their class.
Wonderful. Well, looking ahead, what's next for the CLT? Are there any plans for expanding its scope, including new subject areas or additional resources for students?
Yeah, I think next in head, I grew up on the movie Braveheart. I don't know if you're a fan, Thomas.
It's one of my favorite films.
It's so good. So there's a great part right before the Battle of Stirling, and William Wallace, after giving this really inspirational speech, he starts to ride off, and his friend says, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to pick a fight." And that's kind of the mantra of CLT. We want to pick a fight with the educational establishment. Students have been robbed. They've been robbed of being exposed to the transcendentals. They've been robbed of an education that's worthy of their dignity. And so we really want to challenge kind of the static, sterile mainstream education establishment right now. And that starts with challenging the College Board. They are in almost every school in the country through AP, PSAT, SAT. They have a huge impact in driving curriculum in a way that minimizes the contribution of the Western intellectual tradition and the Catholic Church.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for all that you're doing, Jeremy. Thank you for watching this podcast. You can subscribe and tell your friends that Conversatio is available on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.